Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in tonight. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan and all of us at Books and Books, I welcome you to a virtual evening with the editors and contributors of an important and timely new book, Exile in Global Literature and Culture, Homes Found and Lost. Written by prominent literary critics, creative authors, and artists, the essays gathered within this book meditate upon the painful journeys, geographic, spiritual, emotional, and psychological of exile, along with the triumph of transcendence. Tonight, I'm pleased to introduce you to the editors of this new book, Asher Z. Milbauer and James M. Sutton, who will then introduce and interact with some of the contributors, but first, a little bit about them. Asher Z. Milbauer is professor of English and the founding director of the Exile Studies Certificate Program at Florida International University. His publications include a book on literary transplantation, Transcending Exile, Conrad Nabokov, I.B. Singer, an extended study on exile and return titled Eastern Europe in American Jewish Literature, and the co-edited collection of original essays, Reading Philip Roth. He has recently been awarded the FIU Top Scholar distinction and has organized and curated many special programs pertaining to exile studies. James M. Sutton is Associate Professor of English at Florida International University. His work bridges Shakespeare studies with issues of exile, transplantation, immigration, and Latinx identities. He's the author of Materializing Space at an Early Modern Prodigy House, and while department chair from 2008 to 2016, he played an instrumental role in the establishment of the Exile Studies program at FIU. He co-organized many of the lectures that brought national and international scholars of exile to Miami, and since 2017, he has been faculty fellow in the FIU Honors College. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by clicking the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to as many of those as we can following the presentation. Remember, you can easily purchase a copy of this wonderful new book for your personal library by pressing the green button below. Every purchase you make helps keep Books and Books running, and these are tough times, my friends, so every order helps, and we thank you. And now, without further ado, I'd like to bring our guests to the stage. Here we go.
Okay.
There you are.
Very good.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Nosti and Mr. Kaplan, for giving us the opportunity to present our recently published book, Exile in Global Literature and Culture, Homes Found and Lost. I also want to thank our three panelists, Drs. Michael Gillespie, Ms. Dr. Uva De Aragon, and Magic Tablecloth, who have kindly agreed to be part of tonight's event. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Jamie Sutton for being an ideal partner in our collaborative efforts, Exile in Global Literature and Culture. His wisdom, intellectual acumen, and incomparable erudition are reflected on every page of our book. I could not have wished for a better collaborator. Let me just briefly outline what is to transpire here tonight. Following my introductory remarks, Jamie will read a couple of fitting for the occasion passages from our co-authored introductory chapter, The Overreaching Arc of Exile. Then our panelists will be invited to answer questions we have devised for them and read from their respective essays. We hope we will have enough time to address some questions from the audience. The publication we are presenting today is in fact an extension of the Exile Studies program I initiated 10 years ago. Jamie Sutton was the chair of the English department at the time, while I served as the director of the graduate studies program. For many years, during my tenure at FIU, I was teaching courses in exile studies, publishing in the field of exile studies, and inviting many notable scholars and writers to come to FIU and lecture on topics related to exile. Witnessing an ever-growing interest in exile literature by both students and faculty, I approached Jamie and suggested that given the life experiences of our students, many were either immigrants or children of immigrants, and the unique nature of Miami as a city of exile, a kibbutz galuyot indeed, an ingathering of exiles, the time might have arrived to formalize our activities and create an academic, curricula-driven program with an exile studies certificate at its core. I told Jamie that anchoring the certificate in literary studies makes perfect sense. Literature, unlike other academic fields, particularizes rather than universalizes the mysteries of the human condition, providing thus grounds for entry into the realm of otherness and assisting readers/students in gaining a clearer understanding of self and the world. Recognizing the merits of my suggestion, fully aware of the sweeping forces of globalization, Jamie agreed to support my efforts. Today we have a thriving certificate in exile studies, assisted by many academic units and centers across our campus. The program enjoys wide community support. Through the years, we created numerous lecture series and symposia, such as Exile and Creativity and Totalitarianism, Exile, Patronage and the Arts, Exile, the Burdens and Joys of Inheritance, and more. We partnered with the Coral Gables Museum in a semester-long effort to house Beyond Swastika and Jim Crow, Jewish refugee scholars at Black colleges, an exhibit on loan from the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York. Assisted by Jonathan Platzik and Deborah Platzik-Briggs of the Betsy Hotel, we have established the FIU Betsy Exile Studies Writer Scholar in Residence program with Chenjere Hobe, a Zimbabwean political exile writer, as the first artist in residence. Also with the Betsy, we celebrated Yiddish, a language of exile and survival, by holding salons and scholarly gatherings. None of this would have been possible without the support of our students, colleagues, and friends. And without the support and encouragement of Dean Heather Russell, she became the department chair after Jamie stepped down, and the current chair, Anna Luzhinska. I am deeply grateful. To conclude, let me reiterate and reinforce some of the earlier mentioned thoughts, observations by reading a few sentences from our introductory chapter. A single leitmotif has characterized all the endeavors of the FIU Exile Studies program, whether these take the form of either private moments of classroom instruction and reflection or more public instances of academic and creative expression. The pervasive theme has been an understanding that exile is always experienced in specific particularities, but with implications that are universal and thus far-reaching. Miami is our local home, but the horizon of exiles are limitless, indeed global. The history of exile, the history of the world, is indeed the history of exile, with no end in sight. This book, as I pointed out a bit earlier, serves as the natural academic outgrowth of the program and its rich series of lectures and panels, and through its publication we hereby make known to a much wider public the ideas and the assertions about exile held by many of the acclaimed speakers and thinkers who have appeared at FIU over the past decade. Their lectures at FIU served as springboards to the fresh and original pieces presented in our book. Three of our contributors, as I've said, are here with us tonight. Thank you again, Michael, Uva, and Marjorie, for making time to participate in what we hope will be a fine evening. And now I will yield to Jamie Sutton to add more introductory remarks.
Thank you so much, Asher. I really appreciate all that you've done for Exile Studies, for the English Department, for Florida International University. Indeed, one of the aspects of Exile that I've learned from you is that exile is a condition that brings about loneliness and deep feelings of being dislocated. And I know later tonight we will be discussing some of that. But I think that the way to transcend exile is through hospitality and through generosity.
Sorry, it seems that there's an echo. Do you happen to have headsets that you can wear, headphones? There is like a reverberation. Or make sure that all of the tabs on your computer are closed. We can try again.
Is that better?
Well, we're hearing you through the computer, through Asher's computer. You don't have headphones, right? That you could just put in? Nope. Okay. All right. Well, let's give it a shot.
Okay. Asher, I'm wondering if you mute yourself, if that will help.
Pardon me?
Can you mute yourself?
I just muted him. Let's see.
Okay. Is that better?
A little.
Okay. Well, this is the conditions that we live in, and I'm very sorry to all of our audience for this interference. But what I'd like to do is read a little bit more from our introduction. Christina, should I just keep going and see if we can?
I just don't know that we're going to be able to defeat that echo without the headphones.
Does it make a difference if I turn off? Oh, you can't hear me, is that correct?
No, now I can hear you. It's better. It's better. Okay.
Can you hear me, Asher?
Yes, go. It
You
sounds
can hear
better.
me right now? Okay.
What did you do?
If you can hear me, then let's go ahead. Again, my apologies to all of our audience for that interference. What I'd like to do once again is to thank Asher and everyone at FIU, but in particular, Asher for his leadership of this program, for his inspired vision, and for his generosity and hospitality. What I was trying to say before we got interrupted by all of that is that if there's any way to overcome and move through exile, it is, I believe, through acts of hospitality, through sharing bread and drink around a table. It's an abiding theme within our book. And without giving away any secrets, I will just say that Asher and I wrote this book in his lovely home. And it was just one afternoon and evening after another of his and his lovely wife, Luba's generosity towards me as a scholar and a friend. So what I would like to do here is read just a little bit more from our introduction. Exile in Global Literature and Culture, Homes Found and Lost, includes contributions by leading scholars in the field of exile studies and creative artists and authors, three of whom, as Asher has already mentioned, join us tonight, and from whom we shall soon hear. The writings of many of our contributors have been deeply informed by their own exilic experiences, whether these are firsthand or inherited through their parents or grandparents. Other authors included in our book approach their subject from seemingly more scholarly perspectives. And yet, due to its seeming universality, Exile in one manner or another has touched all of our authors and their essays. Indeed, our entire collection bears witness to the widespread nature of exilic pilgrimage and journey, both in terms of time and geographic space. Our book proposes two important claims about the impact of exile on the individual. First, we assert that transplantation initiates an endless journey. The exile is a traveler, a wayfarer whose uprooted life is defined by movement and pathway rather than by stasis and stable identity. Uprooted, the exile is always on the move, or as described by noted scholar and exile Andre Aciman, always in a state of permanent transience. Second, and in seeming contrast to our first premise, the exile is always looking for home, attempting in new lands to establish him or herself as newly at home. The complexity of this task is well captured in the title of the Nobel Prize-winning book by Romanian-German author Herta Müller, Heimat ist das. The full title, rendered into English, might be something like, Home is that which is uttered. Utterance must clearly include language or dialect, but we believe it also extends outward to embrace categories such as religion, family, native region, and customs. All of these ideas, too, express what home was, is, or might be. Thus, home for the exile is a split category, a hybrid concept. Home is both the nostalgic and fondly recalled point of origin, the birthplace, and simultaneously the new locale where the exile attempts to establish fresh roots, to settle, to transcend exile through an effort to assimilate. Yet, as suggested by our volume's subtitle, Homes Found and Lost, we claim that neither the newfound home nor the lost birthplace provide stable foundations. Rather, the life of the exile is defined by the shuttling back and forth, forever journeying between these 2 points. And it matters very little whether this journey is expressed through physical, that is, geographical travel between these 2 homes, or by mental, memorial, and creative pilgrimages expressing themselves through poetry, fiction, art, or music. We affirm through both our title and in all the essays that comprise our collection that the exilic condition is one of global pilgrimage, of constant negotiation betwixt and between 2 elusive and illusory endpoints. The exile is forever liminal, perpetually coastal, endlessly echoing the question posed by Shakespeare's heroine Viola early in the comedy Twelfth Night. Shipwrecked and washed ashore with nothing but the clothes on her back and the memory of her drowned brother, she looks about forlornly and asks her companion, the sea captain, "What country, friend, is this?" And so, Michael Gillespie, let me ask you, what country, friend, is this? Or rather, Michael, what do you feel is the significance of being engaged in the study and teaching of literary exile right here and now in Miami? Michael.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this in this forum this evening, and to participate in the collection that you and Asher put together. I came to exile studies. I backed into exile studies, looking for ways to have an enhanced understanding of the writings of James Joyce, and I was very fortunate. have Asher Milbauer to guide me and direct me towards some of the most astute approaches that scholars of exile studies had already offered. One of the things I found in looking at Joyce and Joyce's intellectual, artistic exile was a sense of commonness among not just other exilic authors like James Baldwin, but authors who are very much part of their social context, yet uniquely divorced from it, from Marcel Proust through Jane Austen to Philip Roth. It gave me a sense of the isolation that you and Asher have already spoken of in the process of composition. It also gave me a keener sense of the isolation that each of us as readers experience in our subjective engagement with a range of different works. So exile and exile studies has enhanced my understanding of a wide range of literature, far more than I had imagined. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity and for the experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And now, if I may, I would like to pose that same question to Marjorie Agosin. Marjorie, what do you feel, following up on Michael, is the significance of studying and teaching literary exile at the present moment?
Thank you, Jamie. I believe that exile is the most important human experience. Since we are born, we leave the safety of the womb and enter the world. And when we pass away, we also leave this world and enter into another country. I also think that the books that are more read and understood are the ones that speak about exile. We are all Ulysses. We are all Odysseus. And even though we don't know much about the existence of Homer, we all add to the Homeric tradition of a wanderer, of a traveler. I teach Latin American literature, and ever since the 1920s, writers have been marked by the condition of exile due to violent dictatorships or in search for possibilities and for home. But I would like to add that all of us search for home, whether it's in an imagination, a place, a country.
Thank you very much, Marjorie. And now I'd like to pose the same question to Uva De Aragon, our third panelist this evening. Good evening, Uva. What do you feel the significance of literary exile?
I want to show the book because we've been talking about it and we haven't shown it. So I want everybody to see what a beautiful cover it has. And thank you for inviting me to participate. I'd like to make 3 points. The exile studies is very important for exiles, especially for people who came to exile as young people and not fully mature or fully educated. And you have the idea it's a unique experience. You feel very lonely. You think nobody else is exiled. So it gives a frame that this is not a unique experience, that ever since Greece and, this has happened and it continues to happen. And in a way, it gives you solidarity with other people. I think for students and for people who have not experienced exile, it gives them an understanding of exile, but also an understanding of otherness. I hope that for students would help them understand people of a different race, people of a different sexual interest. So it helps the student, I think, understand the difference of people in societies and be more tolerant and more solidary. And since I think all of us believe in the powers of ideas, I would like to think that the formal studies of exiles will influence policymakers, ONGs, foundations into helping throughout the world displaced people, because that help is needed, whether there are refugees or exiles or immigrants. So I see it as a benefit for the exile, as a benefit for the academic person who teaches, a benefit for the student, and a benefit for the world.
Thank you. Thank you, all three of you. I appreciate your answers very much. What we would like to do now is move to that time when each of our three contributors will read from their individual chapters. I would like to provide a brief introduction to each contributor before they read. And so we will begin with Michael Patrick Gillespie, who is a distinguished scholar and professor of English at FIU. Prior to coming to Miami, Michael was the inaugural Louise Edna Gwaden Professor of English at Marquette University in Milwaukee. Michael has written and edited more than 20 books on the works of James Joyce, Oscar Wilde, chaos theory, and Irish film. His most recent books include James Joyce and the Exilic Imagination, The Branding of Oscar Wilde, and Film Appreciation Through Genres. Michael's essay in our book, from which he will now read, is entitled The Problem of Exile for James Joyce.
Thank you. The experience of exile, the Irish experience of exile, goes back to the Middle Ages. From the 12th century until the Irish gained independence from the English in 1922, English colonizers regularly expelled native Irish as a convenient way to dispose of troublesome nationalistic agitators. Politics, however, stood as only one of the forces contributing to the ongoing Irish diaspora. Widespread economic exile proved just as painful and more insidious. During the Great Famine, for example, scholars estimate that up to 1 million people died, and a similar number fled the country. While that catastrophe accelerated departures, economic displacement always played a significant role in Irish life. For centuries, agriculture occupied a key sector of the Irish economy. Until only recently, its labor-intensive demands were met through the back-breaking work being undertaken by large families. However, to prevent farms from being increasingly divided until they became so small that they could no longer support agriculture, traditionally, only one child per generation inherited the land. The rest had to leave once the farm changed hands. The departure was every bit as painful as those instigated by more dramatic social conditions. Indeed, until the relatively recent advent of inexpensive transatlantic airfares, these separations held no hope for reunification. When Irish left for the United States or Canada, the party traditionally held the night before was called an American wake. Such traumas ensured that strong emotions would characterize that event, and the two most common were nostalgia and rancor. Examples of nostalgic views of an idealized Ireland abound, and one of the best dissections of its excesses appears in the John Ford film, The Quiet Man. There, the returning Yank, the label the Irish derisively apply to any countryman who has come back to Ireland after spending time in America, is Sean Thornton. His family had been forced to leave by economic exigencies, yet on his return, he unabashedly recounts his mother's ebullient memories of their Irish life, much to the sardonic amusement of the locals. The naivete of Thornton's sentimentality becomes all the more evident as the film methodically illuminates the reflexive harshness lying just under the surface of the close-knit communities of rural Ireland. Unblinking examples of xenophobia, spousal abuse, alcoholism, and misogyny punctuate life in Innisfree, the town to which Thornton returns. And the most devastating appraisal of his sentimentality comes at the end of the film, when Thornton has cheerfully embraced most of these vices as a way of integrating himself into the community. Rancor among the displaced is often manifests itself with less fanfare, but no less ardor. I saw one instance of this when my grandfather, Michael Masterson, was in a hospital dying. He'd come to America in 1910 from Achill Island, which is in the West. As a younger son, he knew that he would not inherit the farm and left because no other sources of income would have been available in Ireland. During one of my visits, I asked him why he never spoke of returning. The bluntness and bitterness of his answer surprised me, for he was not a man given to the open expression of his feelings. Michael, they couldn't feed me when I was there, and I'm goddamned if I'm going to go back and feed them now. The threat of starvation forced my grandfather and many others from Ireland. James Joyce, for his part, felt the danger of creative stagnation. At that time, for any young author living in Ireland, part of becoming a successful writer would have meant adhering to the protocols for creative expression laid down and enforced by W.B. Yeats and Lady Augusta Gregory during the Irish literary revival. John Millington Synge, Patrick Collum, James Stephens, and numerous others conformed. But such a course of action was not acceptable to Joyce. Early on, he showed his dissatisfaction with the parochial tendencies of the creative ethos that surrounded him in Ireland and impressed upon him the imperative to escape. In a satirical pamphlet, The Day of the Ravelment, he declared that a nation which never advanced so far as a miracle play affords no literary model to the artist, and he must look abroad. A year later, Joyce tried to put that view into practice with a scheme to travel to Paris and live there as a student. But even as he organized his escape, he also showed that he was not immune to the temptations of currying favor of the establishment. On the brink of leaving Ireland in November of 1902, he wrote to Lady Gregory, "I intend to study medicine at the University of Paris. I'm going alone and friendless into another country, and I'm writing to you to know, can you help me in any way?" Interestingly, even at the age of 20, Joyce was already cultivating the persona of an exile and of a martyr, for he continues, "Though I seem to have been driven out of my country here as a misbeliever, I found no man yet with a faith like mine." Lady Gregory offered no financial support, but she did help him with letters of introduction, including one to Evie Longworth, the editor of the Dublin Daily Express, who arranged for Joyce to earn money writing reviews for the paper. Proving that no good deed ever goes unpunished, Joyce repaid Lady Gregory's kindness a few months later with a scathing assessment of her book, Poets and Dreamers. Longworth did publish the review, but added Joyce's initials at its end as a way of disavowing his own responsibility. Though Joyce presumably acted out of sincere conviction, nearly 2 decades later, he would satisfy his own gracelessness in the Scylla and Charybdis chapter episode of Ulysses when he has Buck Mulligan chide Stephen Dedalus for not adopting a sycophantic tone in the review of an unidentified book by Lady. Longworth is awfully sick, Mulligan said, after what you wrote about that old hake Gregory. Oh, you inquisitional, drunken Jew Jesuit. She gives you a job on the paper, and then you go and slate her drivel to Jesus. Couldn't you do the Yeats touch? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that. I know I speak for Asher when we thank you for all of your contributions to the program, including this wonderful essay. It's been a marvelous journey with you.
Thank you.
I'd now like to turn to Marjorie Augustine and ask her to read from her chapter. Marjorie is a Chilean American poet, novelist, and human rights activist. She has been recognized by the United Nations with the Human Rights Leadership Award and by the Chilean government with the Gabriela Mistral Prize. She also serves as a poet laureate for the Harvard Refugee Trauma Program. Marjorie is the author of more than 50 books, including narrative poetry, drama, and memoir. Her acclaimed young adult novel, I Lived on Butterfly Hill, won the Cura Belte Prize. Marjorie teaches Spanish at Wellesley College in Massachusetts, and she's joining us tonight from Massachusetts. Marjorie's chapter in our book, from which she will now read, is entitled Landscapes and Geographies of Chilean Exile.
Thank you. I want to take this opportunity to thank Asher and Jamie for this invitation and the participation on the anthology. And it's a wonderful experience to work with such generous people as you. I hear myself with an echo, but I don't know if you can. So my paper, it's about my own geography, my own displacement, and the displacement of others, especially Gabriela Mistral. But I will begin in different parts. The Magic Tablecloth. From a very young age, I was aware of a voice, a guardian of stories, colors, secret landscape, and experiences that came from me, from other places on earth. From that tender age, I understood that the conversation that happened after dinner at my parents' home, and that I used to listen to the closed doors of the dining room, were not unique to Chile. The particular sound of the words still resound in my child's imagination, transformed into a waterfall of unknown colors, from whose waters fabulous beings appear time and again, and became one with the toys in my room, a vital part of the repertoire of my childhood imagination. I grew up immersed in a cascade of experiences from diverse places, as well as from my beloved Chile. At first, the words expressed around my family's table were in Spanish, sprinkled with Yiddish, but later I recognized in them a distant hint of Ladino, interspersed with English and some Russian and German as well. I can attest to feeling like a foreigner without ever having crossed the threshold of my house. I was a child of exile, or perhaps a young girl who grew up surrounded by voices and stories from various parts of the world. I still remember how, for me, those conversations around the dinner table seemed to be constructed on unknown scaffolding, and how the turns of faces, the clicks of tongues, and the laughs forged in distant constellations would unfurl like lights and then cascade down into the knots of the marvelous tablecloths that adorn our table. And then the last part related to others. I learned early on that exile and memory were intrinsically connected. During these after-dinner conversations about one place, person, or another, my family attempted to reassemble fractured memories around our heirloom tablecloth that acted as a metaphor for time in exile, as both concept and family experience was present throughout my life, becoming a common theme on my writing. Just like my own story connects to exile, I am a Jewish woman born into a secular family with ancestors who suffered Russian pogrom, Nazi horror, genocide, and displacement. But none of my Jewish people have experienced expulsion etched into their skin throughout time. I grew up in Chile, in the southern part of the world, where one continent ends and another, Antarctica, begins. As a child, I often dreamed that Chile, perched as it is at the end of the world, would fall into the sea, and that I would find new stories hidden in its depths. I want to thank Alison Ridley for translating my Spanish into her beautiful English. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marjorie.
Thank you.
I would just like to say, again, I'm quite sure that Asher would echo this. Your essay is absolutely beautiful. We are thrilled to include it within our volume. I cannot imagine our volume without your piece. And so we would like to thank you. And also, since exile and speaking is so often also a matter of translation, I would like to note your friend and translator, Ms. Ridley, who did such good work as well. So thank you. Our third reader this evening is Uva De Aragon, who was born in Cuba in 1944. Uva has penned a dozen books in disparate genres, and many of these have been translated and appeared in textbooks and anthologies. Her novel, The Memory of Silence, or Memoria del Silencio, which tells the story of twin sisters separated by the Cuban Revolution, garnered an International Latino Book Award in 2016. Her most recent publication is The Miracle of St. Lazarus, a mystery 20 years in the making. And I know that Uva has another book very soon forthcoming. Until her retirement, Uva served as the assistant director of the Cuban Research Institute at Florida International University. Uva will now read from her chapter in our volume, which is entitled Jose Marti, Just Another Face in the Crowd. Uva.
Thank you very much. I echo the gratitude that Marjorie has expressed of being part of this wonderful book. When I was asked to contribute, I thought that they were going to ask me to write about my own experience as an exile, but they asked me to write about Jose Marti, which is Cuba's most important figure. It's a lot more important than Fidel Castro. And it was really very challenging to do that because Marti, which revered by Cubans in the island and in the diaspora, has been read and studied around the world, and it was very challenging to find something new. As I am sure most of you know, he was born in Cuba in 1853. He very early age started opposing the colonial regime of Spain, was imprisoned and deported at age 17. He studied law in Spain, spent 2 years in Mexico where he got married. He returned to Cuba with his wife, and his son was born in Cuba, but he could not live in Cuba. He was arrested again, and then he arrived in New York in 1980 and stayed there until he left to be part of the war that he organized for independence of Cuba in 1895, where he died in Cuba, embattled at age 42. So my paper deals of those years from 1880 to 1895, where he lived in New York most of his adult life. So here's a passage from the beginning of the essay. Since the times of ancient Greece, banishment from one's land has been one of the worst penance a human being can suffer. All exiles dream of returning to their homeland. So did José Marti. He missed the physical landscape of the island. Palm trees were for him like brides, tropical Penelopes awaiting his return. He wrote letters to his parents and sisters in Havana. He dedicated his first poetry book to his small child who his wife had taken back home. But Cuba was also a place where the tyranny abuses he abhorred thrived. The patria he loved, which inhabited his soul and inspired his writings, did not yet exist. It was his mission to create it. He was conscious of his destiny from an early age. In a poem he published in 1869, when he was just 16 years old, the young warrior Abdallah, his alter ego, declares, and I quote, "I shall be the one to free my anguished patria and wrest my people from the oppressor whose talons rip them apart." Close. At the end of the 19th century, and to this day, New York has been a city with a large population of foreigners in search of a better life. There are, however, significant differences between exiles and immigrants. The former look back, remember, desire to return home. The latter look forward, dream, wish to fit in. Exiles are proud of their language and culture. They pass it on to their children almost with arrogance. Immigrants struggle to learn everything about the society they have joined. Exiles always feel uprooted. Immigrants are anxious to belong. During Marti's lifetime, most Cubans living in New York had left the island for political or economical reasons. Some were refugees from the long 10 Years' War from 1868 to 1878 against Spanish colonialism. Others emigrants who were able to travel back and forth to and from Cuba. Many were members of an educated, prosperous elite. Others working class men and women trying to make a better living. Marti was a true exile. He did not choose to settle in New York to find a good job and make a new life for himself. He knew he could not live in Cuba under Spanish rule. Yet there was always a sense of temporality in his life, which he expresses clearly in his notebook number 8. And I quote, "There is something of a ship in every house in a foreign land. Hay algo de barco en toda casa en tierra extranjera. A certain sensation of indefinite unease persists. We feel the earth oscillating, our feet unsteady upon it. At times we clutch the walls, and where others find footing, we lurch. The spirit is off balance." In his first notebook of 1871, he kept these notebooks throughout the years. Just 1 year after his arrival in the United States, Marti reveals his strong feelings about the difference between his host country and the nation he envisions he will build. North Americans put utility before sentiment. We put sentiment before utility. He compares Americans' calculating heads to a heart so special, so sensitive, so new that it can only be called the Cuban heart, and asks himself rhetorically, how can you ask us to govern ourselves by the same way they govern themselves? He continues his assessment in which his whole culture is in every way superior to the United States. We imitate? No. We copy? No. It is good, they tell us. It's American. Our life does not resemble theirs, and in many aspects it must not become like theirs. In his notes, he recognizes the high degree of prosperity achieved by the Norse, but feels that the cost has been too high. These observations, which will be developed further in later writings, reveal more than his political ideals. They expose the conflicting situation of most exiles when they find themselves between two cultures and feel the need to assert their identity. In his notebook number 5 of 1881, he judged this enigmatic one-liner: to live in exile, to sculpt clouds. Perhaps it's an indication of his feeling of inadequacy in a foreign land where all attempts to build a family, a career, a life seem futile and evaporated into thin air. Marti, however, knew the value of democracy in the United States. His impressions of America, by a very fresh Spaniard, published in English in The Sun and edited by Charles Anderson Dana, begins as follows. I am, at last, in a country where everyone looks his own master. One can breathe freely, freedom being here the foundation, the shield, and the essence of life. He's surprised by the diligent New Yorkers, churning up and down, buying here, selling there, transpiring, working, getting ahead. He understands that even as an outsider, his life has changed forever. And he says, I look respectfully at these people, and I said goodbye forever to the lazy life and poetic inutility of our own European countries. You can see his contradictions. And I just want to finish with a paragraph because although Marti received recognition during his life, it is after his death that the true measure of his greatness was recognized. And this is the ending of the essay. It says, among the many tributes to his memory, a monumental equestrian statue of Marti stands at the edge of New York Central Park, homage to this gentleman of letters who spent his life calling to war and died in battle. However, more than a century ago, when he walked the streets of New York City, this Latin American prophet with dark piercing eyes remained an uprooted exile, just another face in the crowd. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uva. Christina, could you bring, there we go. Asher.
Yeah, thank you so much, Uva and Michael and Marjorie, for reading these beautiful passages from your writings. I'm sure that members of the audience, as well as their friends, would probably want to read the essays in their fullness, and they will be deriving a great deal of pleasure and profit from reading those essays, as well as other essays from the collection. Last spring, when I was teaching my exile studies class, we were sent into virtual exile in the middle of March, and found ourselves all in our little corners, bound by Zoom and remote teaching. And I was wondering towards the end of the semester what will be the reaction to this class by my students, and I was pleasantly surprised. Many of them expressed one simple idea: that the study of exile and the study of exile literature actually helped them to allay their anxieties over what COVID-19 was bringing into their lives. They understood that exile is not only about, but it is also about triumphs over adversity. So Jamie and I thought that maybe an appropriate question for you to answer will be the following one: how does exile and its study, how exile and study might relate to our present moment of the COVID-19 pandemic? So let's start in the same order as we were going and adhering to. Michael, will you start, please?
Yes, thank you, Asher. I think it's a very difficult comparison to make because the permanence of the exilic condition extends far beyond the pain and the stressful moments of the suffering that people are enduring with COVID-19. I don't know. We'll take a contrarian stand. I don't think they can be compared because I feel that, particularly listening to Marjorie and to Uva and having worked with the two of you for so long, that the exilic experience is a very, very precious, very sacred thing. And I'm uncomfortable with the comparison, so I'm sorry that I won't make a connection, but leave it to Marjorie or Uva, should they wish to.
Thank you, Michael. Point well taken. Marjorie?
Also, thank you, Michael. That is perhaps very difficult to compare it with there's so much constant human suffering. But I do have a perspective about exile and the pandemic. The pandemic shows us that there's no certainty. The condition of an exile is uncertainty. The pandemic makes us wonder what happened to the familiar, to the human touch, to gatherings, to a table with a magical tablecloth. It seems that what we knew, it's no longer. So the pandemic reminds me of all of us in the planet Earth moving without moving. We are moving from what we knew to a big unknown. And it's like the immigrants, the refugees that move to arrive to foreign places without really knowing how will their life be. So I see the parallel between the uncertainty, the unfamiliarity, and deep down the hope that it will be okay, that it will turn around.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughtful observations, Marjorie. And Uva?
I agree with Marjorie's observation, and I would like to add that I also think that in this time of pandemic, the families have united more. They have to be together, and that happens in exiles. That a family arrives and everybody else is unknown, and it is the home, really, the heart of a family, more than when you were in your own country, because everybody went to school, had friends, had different activities. But all of a sudden, those 4 or 5 people that came are just alone with the whole world around them as unknown. And I think another important thing is that in exile, one relies a lot into our own interior, our own inner self, our own memories. And I think, and I would like to dare to advise people that this is a good time to reflect upon our inner lives, and also to use the time to take out old photos, to share them with children, with grandchildren, to remember, because that's a lot of the things that exiles do. they remember a life past. But even now, in a new country, we have a life past already. And it's good to take time to take stock of that life that we have lived, even though we always felt we were going to live it someplace else. And I think that exiles always hope that things will change and they will go home. And now everybody hopes that this will come to an end and we'll go to life as we knew it, which what exiles want. I think this ending is going to be happier than the ending of exiles, even though the new normal not be exactly what we knew. But I think eventually we'll go back to life as we knew it, which is something that exiles hardly ever reach.
Yeah.
Except in your memory, which is the way of your return.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Uva, and I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Christina, do we have time to take one or two questions?
Yes, you do.
I would like to pose a question to any of our three speakers who wish to take it. One of our observers has noted that exile, while it often causes great melancholy, can also cause great exhilaration. As Asher often will say, exile is both a blessing and a curse. I'm wondering if any of the three of you would like to speak to the possible blessings of being in exile.
All right. I think they are very hard to see them when it happens. It's a big loss. It's a big loss. But when you look back, it's more of a blessing for some people than for others. I have many friends who feel that having come to the United States, women, for example, they feel that they had more freedom in the United States than they would have had in Cuba. One thing is for certain, exiles try harder to do things well, to succeed. Now, I think for people like me who wanted to be a writer since I was 9 years old, when you lose your country to it, you lose your language, that is your motherland, your language, and that cannot be replaced. So the blessing, I think, is to live in freedom because you are. I think Reinaldo Arenas said it very well when he left through Mariel, and they asked him if he thought it was good. He says, "Well, yes, I was very happy I left, but the house burned anyway. So yes, you're happy you escaped, but your home got burned anyway. You lost everything anyway. So it's a mixed blessing, I guess."
I like to say what my mother used to tell us when we arrived to Athens, Georgia. I was about 15 years old. She always said, "Marjorie, make the best of both places." So an exile has multiple places, the place of belonging, the place of language, the ancestral home, but then the exile could gain the world.
I think from the remarks that both Uva and Marjorie made, it's very clear just how personal, how particular, how subjective the exilic experience is, and it's a triumph for some who are able to enhance the life that they that they embrace, and are able to retain connections with the world that they left, but not feel chained by it. But it is not an inevitably happy ending for exile, and I think that is often a very tragic and even embittering experience as faced with my grandfather.
If the audience will permit, and Christina will permit me to ask one more question, I would like to do that. Let me read the question. Have any of you read Mandala by Pearl S. Buck? Sometimes people can feel in exile in the country of their birth or choice when political divisions take place. That may or may not be a question that you wish to answer this evening, but if any of the three of you would like to tackle that, it seems a very current question.
Well, I read Pearl's book years ago, and I recall that particular book. But there's such thing as being in exile in your own country. That happens all the time. I mean, especially in oppressive regimes, when people are against the government and they feel they are isolated and persecuted, and especially, for example, writers who I cannot publish, and they are exiled in their own countries. That's certainly something that happens quite often.
Well, certainly
Marjorie,
the protest
Michael?
that I was just thinking as Uva was talking, that the protests that we've been experiencing over the last few months bring to the foreground a sense of isolation, a sense perhaps of exile. I want to use the term carefully because I think it's a very important designation, and I don't want to run the risk of diluting it by over application. But I would imagine many of the people that engaged in those protests did and still do feel the kind of isolation and alienation that many exiles encounter.
Jamie, it's a very timely question. I think that we see more and more now in present day America, the exiles of those that are invisible due to poverty, due to race. And it seems that these people have lived in a separate country where they were not seen. And I think now we are finding out how much we are exiled from one another. Those that have power, economic power, political power, and those that are not. And I think that the polarization reveals that somehow we all live in different countries. And Michael was saying how personal it is to speak about exile. But when I came from Chile to America, I always said, I am safe, but I cannot say that now. I don't feel safe here now.
Thank you. Asher, would you like to close out our evening?
Well, I'm thrilled to have had this evening. I was taken by your readings, by your observations. I think they are absolutely important. And if anything we can learn from exile is probably best expressed by a recent statement that I have encountered by Lord Jonathan Sacks, the former chief rabbi of England. And he said the following: "It is the people not like us that make us grow." So I heard that the kind of process of introspection that Uva was talking about, encountering our students who come from different backgrounds, listening to other people, we all will grow and create, probably as a result, a better world for everyone around. So again, I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for contributing. And thank you for taking the time to share your wisdom with all of us. And again, I want to say thank you to Christina and Mitchell. I know how difficult these moments are. They are very often nerve-wracking, but you are doing a great job for the community, have served this community with such
This was such
valor and
such
so
a
much
beautiful, such a
understanding.
wonderful evening. So incredibly wonderful to hear from all of the contributors, from all of you. I wish we were at Books and Books in Coral Gables, and we could all fold our chairs and move into the next room and autograph this book. But we will get there. We will get there again. And I thank you for sharing so openly tonight. And I will remind everyone that's watching, and we have a lot of people watching from all over the world, that you can order the book by just pressing on the green button at the bottom of the screen. And Uva is holding up the beautiful cover. And so is James. So please order away. And I hope that you will stay safe and be well and continue with your wonderful work that has been so impactful for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For keeping our literary community alive.
Thank you so much.
Good night on behalf
Good night.
of us.
Thank you so much.
Good night.